Thank you, Rahel. Israel's operation in Rafah coming after Hamas agreed late Monday to a ceasefire and hostage proposal. That proposal that Israel said has terms that are far from meeting its demands. Well, talks are set to resume today in Cairo with mediators from Qatar, Israel and the US included. And that includes CIA Director Bill Burns looking to solidify a deal. Egypt right now, of course, in two, sort of squarely in two files. It is right on that crucial border where more than 1.4 million Palestinians are sheltering. And it is underscoring how the talks that it is hosting in Cairo right now are directly related to what we are seeing on the ground in Rafah. The foreign ministry said, and I quote, Egypt called on the Israeli side to exercise the utmost levels of restraint and to stay away from a policy of brinkmanship that has long-term impact and that would threaten the fate of the strenuous efforts made to reach a sustainable truce inside the Gaza Strip. Well, Egypt, of course, not the only country in the region calling on Israel to halt a looming offensive. Jordan's foreign minister, not mincing his words, tweeting earlier, and I quote, instead of giving negotiations on hostage release and ceasefire a chance, Israeli government occupied Rafah crossing and closed it to humanitarian aid to starve Gazans. Its attack on Rafah threatens another massacre. The Security Council must act firmly and immediately. Netanyahu must face real consequence. Well, Ayman Safadi, Jordan's foreign minister, joins me now live from Washington. And Foreign Minister, myself and certainly many others around this region where I am went to sleep last night hoping that there was finally some moves to secure a hostage and ceasefire deal in Gaza, only to wake up to Israeli troops on the ground in Rafah occupying that crucial border crossing. I just want to get your reaction to the images that we are seeing out of Rafah today. And just to let our viewers know, you are, as we speak, in Washington.
Thank you, Becky. Good day to you. Terrible images, an indication of the worst that is yet to come if Netanyahu is allowed to continue with a ground invasion into Rafah, which by any standard will be another humanitarian catastrophe. As you said, people were expecting a ceasefire. Indeed, Gazans were celebrating, only for Netanyahu to thwart the deal by occupying the Palestinian side of the Rafah crossing and continuing his rhetoric that is basically saying unless the deal happens, he'll go ahead and kill more thousands of Palestinians. There are negotiations. Mediators are saying that they are closed. Netanyahu is obligated to give those negotiations a chance. Unfortunately, he's done just the opposite. And again, he's pushing towards further escalation that would undermine the strenuous efforts that were made to get to a deal and obviously committing another massacre against Palestinians.
The Israeli perspective is that a ceasefire and hostage deal is not mutually exclusive from an assault on Rafah, where Israel believes the remaining Hamas militants are holed up. Now, Egypt has called for restraint, as you have, and has warned Israel to stay away from a, quote, policy of brinkmanship that has long-term impact. What do you read into Egypt's statement there? What do you make of this call to stop this brinkmanship? Is that how you see things at present?
Well, Egypt is trying to prevent a massacre from happening. It's trying to prevent escalation. And it's not only Egypt. The whole world is saying the Rafah operation shouldn't happen. Indeed, Israel's biggest supporter, the United States, is saying that Rafah operation should not happen. But again, the reality is Netanyahu is defying the whole world, is throwing even his allies under the bus and continuing with actions that are hurting all prospects for a ceasefire, dragging the region further into the abyss. And again, causing another humanitarian catastrophe. I think it is time the whole world realized that Netanyahu's got to be stopped. Statements and urging is not going to do it. It is time Netanyahu faced consequences. That is the moment. That's the reality that the whole world should recognize and act upon right now.
Foreign Minister, you are coming to us from the US Capitol, where yesterday King Abdullah met with President Joe Biden, cautioning against an Israeli attack on Rafah. Some months ago, Joe Biden himself calling Rafah a red line. You were in the room. Can you just explain a little more on what was discussed and what Joe Biden said?
I mean, basically, the discussion was focused on stopping the ground invasion into Rafah, ensuring that humanitarian catastrophe is addressed and it's not allowed to be aggravated further, and stopping the war, getting a ceasefire, getting the hostage deal done, and actually move towards an irreversible path towards a once and for all peace. His Majesty was very clear in warning against the horrific consequences of an attack on Rafah, and also of the devastating impact of Israel continuing with its war and not allowing for all of us to come together and try and create the peace that would address Israel's concerns and Palestinians' rights. So it was a very, very open discussion, very frank discussion, and but unfortunately, again, Netanyahu is not listening. He's just continuing with his defiance of the whole world.
We know that broadly the parameters of a deal being discussed at present are, first phase, the release of a number of hostages, up to 33. Second phase, the restoration of, as it is described, a sustainable calm, otherwise known as a sustainable ceasefire. Third phase, potentially, the process of moving towards a plan for Gaza going forward. Do you agree in Jordan with the loose parameters of this deal? And to your understanding, do both sides ultimately agree with the parameters of this deal? I'm trying to get to whether, if two sides over the next however many days can get together and agree on the finer detail, we are anywhere close to a temporary truce, the release of some hostages, and the potential for a sustainable calm or ceasefire.
Becky, the deal has been months in the making. Mediators have said that there are enough parameters to be able to get everybody's agreement to, and then move ahead with the deal. We all support the deal. It must happen. Both sides are going to have to realize that this deal is a must. Get the hostages out, released, get a ceasefire, and stop this massacre. But again, I think it is wrong morally, legally. It is unacceptable for Netanyahu to leverage the killing of other thousands of Gazans to get the deal. He needs to negotiate in earnest. And again, the mediators are working extremely hard, have been working non-stop to try and get that deal. So there are parameters that everybody agrees on. At least the mediators say that they are sufficient. Details need to be worked out, and that's what negotiations are for. So again, negotiations should continue in earnest. Israel should negotiate, stop the attack on Rafah, and give mediators a chance to get that deal and get us the calm that should ultimately lead to a permanent ceasefire.
Israel's Foreign Minister, Israel Katz, has provided a statement that says that the entry of Israeli forces into Rafah promotes Israel's main goals of this war, including the securing the release of hostages and the defeat of Hamas. Israel hasn't changed its strategic goals this past 7 months. He also said, and I quote him here, Foreign Minister, the work of political persuasion on the political front is becoming more difficult. Do you understand that to be a statement directed to Washington? And is it your sense that there is a ratcheting up of significant pressure by Washington on Israel at present, and a frustration on Israel's side about that and the part that the US is playing in mediating these talks.
I mean, again, the whole world is come to a point where it is unequivocally saying that this war has got to stop, that a ceasefire is a must. But we go back to the same point. Netanyahu is vetoing all this effort. He's making sure that no efforts to bring an end to this war succeeds. And if I may, Becky, today, this morning, a convoy of aid moving out of Jordan to Eretz was attacked by radical settlers, the same settlers who rampage Palestinian villages with impunity. Israel is legally responsible to protect that envoy, and it did not. It allowed those settlers to vandalize it, and it does so at the same time when it closes Rafah and Karem Abu Salim points and stop aid from coming into the Palestinians, with Guterres warning that Gaza is running out of fuel or facing that risk of running that fuel tonight. So that all should speak to the fact that Israel is just continuing with its aggression, violating international law, continuing with its siege on Palestinians, and not listening to anybody, and dragging the whole region into war. How could Israel justify attacking an aid convoy that it promised to secure on its own, with its own forces, and it did not? So this is a despicable crime that must be condemned by the whole world and must bring alarm to the whole international community that Israel will just continue to do what it wants to do in defiance of the will of the international community. And it's time that the Security Council, the whole international community, acted firmly, effectively, used all its legal tools to prevent this Israeli government from committing further crimes, further violation of international law, and starving more people. And again, all that Israeli government is saying about allowing for Palestinians in Rafah to be relocated is just unacceptable. The US itself, that it has not seen a plan for that. What Israel is doing is people who have already lost their homes, displaced into shelters that do not have the basic requirements of life. Now it wants to displace them again under the bombing that continues to wreck their lives. So that is the reality. It is time the world said enough and acted to stop an Israeli government from further crimes and further escalation in the region.
You and I were both in Riyadh last week in the same room that Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, sat in and suggested that the deal on the table, or the proposal on the table for Hamas when it comes to a ceasefire and hostage deal at this point, was enormously generous. Now, Hamas officials speaking last night in, as they say, agreeing to this proposal, said that they understand the Americans to be committed to ensuring the implementation of this deal, which speaks to the fact that they have for months been seeking a guarantee from Washington that a permanent ceasefire will indeed happen once the first phase of this deal is complete, if it ever gets signed. You are in Washington and you are speaking to administration officials and others on the Hill. To your mind, has or will Washington provide the sort of guarantee that Hamas is looking for at this point? Can they even do that?
I mean, Egypt, Qatar, the US, all have been very engaged in negotiations to get that deal. They've been working extremely hard, and a ceasefire by definition means that both parties abide by it and stop hostilities. So again, there is a deal on the table. Yes, there are things that still need to be worked out, but that is what negotiations are for. And the US is a mediator in this deal. And I'm sure that the three parties working to provide this deal would do what is required to convince the two parties that the commitments that are being made would be respected. But again, we have an opportunity here that would get the hostages out, get a ceasefire. Netanyahu needs to engage in earnest, and if he does not stop the aggression on Rafah, he is jeopardizing that deal, and he's again pushing the region further into escalation. That is what we should all be focused on, And I think, again, Netanyahu should not be allowed to continue to murder with impunity, to continue with violating international law, and deny people the right to get out of this misery and put the region on a track to peace for both Palestinians and Israelis.
You were in the meeting with President Biden and King Abdullah yesterday. I know that you've got meetings on Capitol Hill and at the Pentagon alongside King Abdullah. So what is the reception to the message that you have provided here? And repeatedly, as I speak to you, I hear your message. It doesn't change. What's the reception? How would you describe the reception to this message in Washington and very specifically on the Hill?
I don't want to be speaking on behalf of the US. We're starting our meetings on the Hill in a couple of hours. But all I can tell you is that the US has publicly said it will not support a ground offensive into Rafah. It will continue to work for a ceasefire, that the war has got to stop, and we need to move forward on a path towards peace. So we made that message very clear. His Majesty was unequivocal in expressing the Jordanian position, which, as you said, you're very, very aware of. And we continue to engage with the American administration. Only the US has enough leverage to stop this Israeli government from dragging the region further into the mud. And we hope that we'll be seeing that leverage used effectively, and to the extent that it does prevent Netanyahu from dooming Gazans to more suffering and starvation, and the region to more conflict and wars and violence in the future.
And with that, we'll leave it there. To remind our viewers, the crossing at Rafah is now closed, as is Kerem Shalom, and the Jordanian foreign minister pointing out and decrying the second attack on a Jordanian convoy using the Eretz crossing. This is about